I always like to joke that all of these consist of like a children's garden of me saying, "Are we live yet?" But I won't bring you on spotlight. Thank you so much for joining us. You can start with kind of a opening pitch, and then we'll do like you can take like however long you feel need to do that. We can do some Q&A.
Okay, no, that sounds great. First of all, thank you so much for having me. Jonathan, thank you for your leadership here with progressives in the community. Really appreciate it. And also you organizing this event. It doesn't happen by accident. And thank you to everyone who is on tonight. I see some familiar faces and some faces I don't know who you are. So by the end of this Zoom, I hope to know all of you better. Of course, happy to talk about who I am, why I'm running in this moment in time, and then leave, frankly, the bulk of time for your questions or comments. Obviously, I'm Andrea Campbell, and I've had the privilege and the honor of representing District 4, which is largely Dorchester, Mattapan, a little bit of Jamaica Plain, and Rosendale on the City Council for the last 6 years. Just started my 6th year on the council. I have worked on a whole host of issues, including education, working to improve our Boston public schools, addressing the housing crisis, policing reform, criminal justice reform, and many other issues. And always with the intention of trying to create greater transparency, accountability, and equity in our systems. My entire life has been shaped by and connected to the city of Boston. I was born and raised in Boston. I grew up in Roxbury in the South End. I'm a product of Boston Public Schools. I went to 5 excellent BPS schools, including Boston Latin School. I left Latin and then I went to Princeton University and then UCLA for law school. Then I came all the way back and started my legal career at a local nonprofit in Roxbury, representing students and parents in education cases, a whole host of education cases. Love that work. I've worked in the private sector and the public sector as an attorney, including working for Governor Deval Patrick as one of his attorneys. Boston is also sadly where I've experienced tremendous pain and loss. 9 years this year actually marks 9 years since my twin brother Andre passed away. Instead of graduating from a Boston public high school and going off to reach his God-given potential, he cycled in and out of the criminal justice system and passed away while in the custody of the Department of Correction, which oversees our prisons here in Massachusetts, when he was only 29 years old. He was a pretrial detainee, which meant that he was actually in custody with a high cash bail, waiting to go to trial for 2 years. And as a result of receiving inadequate health care for a disease he had called scleroderma, as a result of receiving inadequate health care, he passed away while in that system when he was obviously very young. And the question I asked and still ask that continue to inform my work, which is how do 2 twins born and raised in the city of Boston have such different life outcomes? That is the question that gave me the courage to challenge a 32-year incumbent and join the council in the first place. That is still the question that drives my work and is absolutely still fueling this run for mayor. What I've come to realize is that we both had tragedy early on in our lives. Our mother died when we were 8 months old in a car accident, going to visit our father, who was incarcerated at the time. Our father was incarcerated for the first 8 years of our lives. So we lived with relatives, family members, bounced around quite a bit, sometimes in foster care. My father gets out of prison when we're 19 years old. I was a sophomore at Princeton, talked to him one morning. He died that same evening. Andre and I both grew up, obviously, in Boston. We grew up poor. We grew up in public housing at times or affordable housing. We both went to Boston public schools. But what I've come to realize and to know to be true is that many of the systems that served me and allowed me to be successful absolutely failed him and continue to fail thousands of Bostonians today. Boston Public Schools I focus on quite a bit because that is one system that I know absolutely served me well, put me on advanced work track, took me into places and spaces I'd never been exposed to, gave me jobs and all kinds of opportunities. But instead, my peers, including my brother, did not have access to those same opportunities through their schools or the schools they attended. I have recognized that the inequities, whether in access to good education, good jobs, good healthcare, neighborhoods that feel safe, streets that are clean, all of that is familiar to me. All of that is familiar to the residents I've had the privilege of representing on the council for the last 6 years. And sadly, these inequities have existed for generations. And I think in the midst of COVID-19 and this, whether it's a national reckoning on race and racism, as some folks are referring to it as, or a pivotal moment in this country, I think we're all seeing and experiencing just how deep and debilitating these inequities are. And that they don't just affect communities of color, but they actually have an effect on all of us. But amidst the calls for change, we've had folks obviously take to the streets in the thousands, email us, call us and say, we want to see greater systems reform. We want to eradicate these persistent inequities. Amidst all that, there's also a separate narrative that runs in the city of Boston, that Boston doesn't have a race issue, that Boston is better when it comes to policing, that Boston is doing the best when it comes to addressing these inequities. And while Boston is, of course, #1 in many respects, we obviously have some of the best healthcare and hospitals in the country or in the world. We have some of the best higher ed institutions and public universities. We have some of the best industries and emerging industries in the city of Boston. While all that is true, sadly, we're still, by certain metrics, one of the most unequal cities in the country. And we have yet to actually live up to the promise of being the best for every single resident in the city of Boston. What I've also come to know to be true is that the data also demonstrates that we have incredible work still to do. I live in Mattapan, for example. I have 2 beautiful boys, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. Good luck trying to get into a high quality Boston public school. You have a 5% chance if you live in Mattapan like I do with my 2 boys. If you live in certain downtown neighborhoods, it's 80%. Just if you looked at our policing data, just last year, 70% of the police stops in the city of Boston were of Black residents, even though we only make up a quarter of the population. You see it in data with respect to communities that are situated in transportation deserts, food deserts, limited access to green space. We also, of course, see it in the numbers with respect to the racial wealth gap, which continues to be staggering. For a Black family, it's $8. From some Latino or Latinx families, it is $0. For a white family, it's nearly $250,000. And I don't think, obviously, any of this happened by accident. They were partially created by government, and I think government is in a unique position to eradicate these inequities. I think Boston is facing a critical moment. I'm not sure that we're going to get it anytime soon or again. I think we have an opportunity that also we may not get again soon to confront our own painful history when it comes to race and racism, segregation, marginalization, and to finally do the hard work of eradicating the persistent inequities that exist in our city because of that painful history. But for us to do that, we need leadership that doesn't just understand the inequities, but has lived them. Never in a million years did I think that I would have the opportunity and the privilege of serving as an elected official and to use my story and to use my lived experiences for a purpose such as this, or a time such as this. I also think we need leadership that brings people together across every single demographic you can imagine. My leadership style has always done that. And I'm running for mayor because I think I'm the most uniquely qualified person to lead Boston in this moment in time. And I've demonstrated that in my past work on the council and of course in other spaces as well before joining the council. And I'll add, we all have a stake in this city being equitable in the future for everybody. Whether it is you actually work in one of those emerging industries that hasn't missed a beat in COVID. You want a talented workforce, but most importantly, you want a workforce that is local. If you are a taxpayer, you should be concerned if your government is actually spending your money effectively on programming that will actually close and eradicate these inequities. I think we all want our children to go to excellent schools and have access to every opportunity they can think of for themselves or imagine. I think we all, of course, want violence and incidents of violence to decrease, not to expand or go up, and to all feel safe in our community. I think we all, of course, love the city of Boston and want it to truly be the best in creating and sustaining resilient communities for everybody. I'm excited for what I've done so far. I'm excited for the campaign. I've experienced and felt what it looks like when Boston does not work for everyone. I've felt that pain and that suffering and that trauma, but I've also felt what it's like to see and experience the possibilities. I've worked with unlikely colleagues to pass some incredible legislation, including the Community Preservation Act, which was my first piece of legislation on the council, which is generating millions of dollars for affordable housing, parks and open space and historic preservation. I've worked with all of you, I think, many of you in many ways, and civic leaders from across the city of Boston in convening a civic summit that literally brought together hundreds, nearly 400 civic leaders from every neighborhood in the city of Boston, every demographic you can think of, where we came together to develop shared plans and action plans to respond to some of our persistent inequities in the city of Boston. I am not afraid of what the race will bring. For me, I won't sit here, I should say, and tell you that I'm an expert on every single issue. I am not, or that I have all the answers. I do not. What I will promise you is that I will always be honest about where we are as a city and what we have to do to improve. I will always lead with intentionality, with boldness, with courage, and with a sense of urgency, and most importantly, action. And action, of course, to recover from COVID-19. But I think we can do that while actually working on eradicating the persistent health inequities that exist in the city of Boston. We can, of course, work to make sure that we reimagine and reshape our policing system while also eradicating the persistent racial inequities we see in that system. We, of course, can make sure that everyone can afford to live in the city of Boston. We can, of course, make sure that all of our children, all of them, have access to an excellent education. And I define that as birth to 12th grade, with everything they need to succeed and accomplish their dreams. We can, of course, make sure that we recover economically and that we do that in an equitable way while ensuring that our economy is more inclusive and allows and affords more residents opportunity in that economy. And we, of course, can make sure that Boston is a leader when it comes to climate justice, but frankly, do it in such a way that it centers communities of color, because if we don't, that movement will absolutely fail. And so I'm excited for all of this. I'm not afraid of what the race will bring. I wasn't afraid when I jumped in back in September, when I thought our mayor was still gonna run. I'm not afraid of who may jump in. What I am afraid of is that in the next 5, 10, or 15 years from now, we'll be talking about the same inequities, the same injustices, or more Andres. And that I absolutely refuse to accept. And so I'm really excited to be on with you guys tonight, of course, to talk about the issues and to hear from you. And I'm really grateful that each of you would take time out of your busy schedules in the midst of COVID to be a part of the conversation tonight. And Jonathan, thank you so much again for convening all of us and organizing tonight's conversation. Really appreciate
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And then want to be able to take questions from folks. So feel free to either raise your hand and put your questions in the chat, or just ask them directly. Ben or Jane, is that a new hand?
It's a Ben. Hi, Andrea.
Hi, I try to make Zoom feel interactive. So I put it on the gallery view. So I'm looking for you. Oh, I see you. Hi, Ben.
Hi, I had communicated with you. We've never met. I grew up in Mattapan and I graduated from Boston Latin School. I also happen to be a pediatrician. So here's the question.
Yeah.
Would you commit to universal pre-K 3 and 4, do something about early child programs, and also commit to developing a children and youth cabinet within the city to coordinate all of those services that are so important for kids?
Yes, yes, and yes. Those are the short answers. And on the universal pre-K, and I think Katie from my team is on, and we can include in the chat a plan I put out a couple of years ago that we're building upon and just expanded in a recently released education plan. I define universal pre-K as birth to 5 years old. And I think there's a way in which the city of Boston can truly lead in delivering that type of universal pre-K to our families, in partnership, of course, with private providers and many others. That's what I'm committed to. I think it is critically important that every child have access to that foundation. I had it growing up in the city of Boston. We don't need another report to talk about how critically important it is. So yes, and look forward to actually maybe following up on the cabinet piece, which is very creative and I think a wonderful idea.
Awesome. Steph.
Hi, thank you for being here. And I also wanted to thank you for at least the small step in terms of how students are going to enter the exam schools this year. And I just wanted to say in front of everyone that I did a lot of advocacy around that. And I thought it was incredible that you immediately responded to my email. So I think that really shows your dedication to community. So my question, mindful of Boston Public Schools, is I'd love to hear how you feel about an elected school committee, but I also want to know, like, why, if hybrid enters your thoughts,
Yeah.
and why not elected if you more believe in hybrid.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Steph. And thank you for lifting up the email response. Maybe it's the lawyer in me, I don't know, but that is very important to me. I tell my team, we sort of have a 24 or 48 hour response time, but on issues that tend to be whether controversial or involve issues or conversations around race, or anything else that would sort of create this in community, I think it's critically important to be responsive. And so I appreciate you emailing and engaging us on that issue. I am actually, I'm leaning more towards hybrid, and that's only because, well, I'll say this. We absolutely need to change the structure of the school committee and the appointment process. It's not working. 100% appointment powers with the mayor, I don't think work for the school committee or other positions, frankly. And so only reason I haven't, and I'm exploring hybrid, and there are several models or proposals out there for hybrid. The only reason I haven't fully committed to an elected school committee is because I do think we need to have further conversation. And I'll say this, when it first came up, the district I represent, I take my cues from my district residents, right? That's who I'm accountable to right now. And there were many folks in my district who emailed, who called, who says, absolutely not. You probably weren't even born during that time, but don't you dare go back to 100% elected. I have 2 former school committee members from that time period who live in my district who are absolutely opposed to going back to 100%. They're more open to hybrid because they do think this sort of rubber stamping is a problem. But I do think people might be more open to an elected if they were engaging more people in the conversation. And so that's where I am right now. But would love to continue that with you going forward.
Okay, thank you for your
Thank
response.
you.
And I was just going to mention, I have a 6th grader in 02118, and I'm very supportive of what's going on in the exam school.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for emailing.
Any other questions?
Oh, I see. Is it Carol going this?
Carol.
Yeah, hi.
Hi,
What
Carol.
a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Counselor.
Thank you.
Every day, we're frustrated by the poor planning, poor policy, poor performance of poor preparedness of Massachusetts in terms of COVID. And sure, there is a hierarchy where the state takes the lead and we're in essence kind of like at the mercy of. Are there ways in which the city of Boston can create some workarounds, can innovate and carve out some spaces so that the whole procedure and policy works better for the people of this city?
So yes, the short answer is yes. I think we're all frustrated at moments with the state and administration. I think maybe on a few issues, not just frankly COVID, maybe mass and CAS and the opioid crisis as well, and needing the state to step up a lot more to be a partner. And we can keep pushing. And I think frankly, a lot of electeds are working in partnership from the federal, state, and local level as a delegation, a Boston delegation and Boston Strong, to push the governor, to push Health and Human Services, et cetera, to do better, to prioritize communities of color in particular, elders, teachers, early ed providers when it comes to vaccination, to expand testing, all of that. But of course, I think for every issue, we can't wait on them. People are dying. You know, I'm obviously currently a counselor that is seeing high rates of folks continue to get infected. I have Mattapan and Dorchester are my biggest neighborhoods. People are still dying from COVID. We still have cases where people are getting sick and dying from COVID. It is still devastating our entire city. And so I have still been pushing the city to do more. We still have folks, when you go get tested, you maybe have to wait in a line, right? Or we don't have enough mobile testing. Or if you do get tested, you got to wait more than 24 hours for your results. That is absolutely unacceptable. In addition, vaccination rollout. We still have a lot more work to do. I held a 5-hour hearing just recently on this very issue of how we could do better. And what I came to know and learn is that there are a lot of folks, whether it's community-based organizations, hospitals, community-based health centers, and along with our health commission on the ground doing incredible work, but it's often siloed. It's maybe duplicative. It's not coordinated. And so I've been pushing the city of Boston to grant more organization, or more grants, I should say, to organizations on the ground that have a trusted relationship with some of the harder to reach communities, that can speak different languages, are culturally competent, who can have a better job of reaching folks and getting them vaccinated than the city does directly. How do we invest in those organizations on the ground? And then how do we also invest in those folks who are better at coordinating all these folks on the ground? Sometimes I think we do that well as a city, and sometimes we don't. And we need to admit to ourselves when we don't necessarily do the direct service part great. And there are a lot of folks on the ground who could play a better, more meaningful role in the coordination piece and are waiting for us. And I do think there are resources there, philanthropic partners who are stepping up, hospitals as well. So I think it just requires us to be more intentional and to move a little faster, while at the same time, of course, continuing to push the state. And I'll just add, sorry, Jonathan, Carol, to your point, you know, it is important that we give out information to folks so they can get vaccinated, critically important. But we also have to help with the other logistics, you know, transportation, getting them to the appointment, following up to make sure they're okay and they don't have symptoms after the fact. If they have to miss their job, well, they might need some resources because they didn't get paid and they need those resources. These organizations on the ground who have those relationships can respond to all of that and create a point of contact for that family or that resident. And there are folks already doing that. And so there is a way for us to scale that up. And folks are waiting for us to, I think, to do just that.
Are there any partnerships currently going on, say, between Boston and other major cities that might impact the decisions that the governor is making?
Well, I know many of us electeds have been working with our partners in service in Chelsea, right? Some of our neighboring communities who've just seen some drastic, just their communities be devastated health-wise and economically. And so we've sent joint letters, participated in joint phone calls with other municipalities to also push for the state to do better. And that collective advocacy, I think, is always great. Frankly, on any issue, you take a regional approach, you're going to have a better result for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the question.
I'll ask one quick one myself. So one thing, and then say thank you for the kind of work on police accountability work on the council last year. So when thinking about how to limit kind of cases of, let's say, police brutality or et cetera, one kind of observation is one of the best ways to limit cases of police brutality is to limit opportunities in which police are interacting with, like kind of limit the scope of what we call policing focuses. What are some of the ways that you think that there are functions currently housed within the Boston Police Department that could be better done by a different agency, or other ways of limiting that scope of a kind of police presence in day to day?
No, I appreciate the question. And there are various ways. A lot of what's been coming up recently is a lot of our mental health cases that come in that involve some serious mental health concerns, and pulling in other departments, whether they're inside the city to respond or external partners as well, and using our 311 system. Or if you go through the 911 system, it immediately redirects through 311 to a group of folks who can respond, and that can be internal partnered with external folks. Domestic violence. I've hosted a lot of different conversations on this very issue. Sometimes it doesn't in the immediate either require or it's not necessarily the best for the police to show up. And so there have been a lot of folks for a long time, especially in the midst of COVID, as folks get really creative for some of our domestic violence cases and how to safely get someone out of their home if they're living with their abuser, all of that, have been great at looking at technology or some of our other providers on the ground. And so those are two large groups of cases that already there's conversation, and I'll even say internally right now about redirecting. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. So there will be, you know, that's why the community will continue to have to step up for these purposes. I mean, I was on the phone, this was maybe a year ago, talking with a former officer who was the solely responsible for creating the 911 system we have today, which is run by civilians. That wasn't always the case. It used to be police officers. And so there are ways in which to reimagine the system all the time. And I think we always need to be thinking about what that looks like.
Andrea, it's Margaret.
Yeah.
I just
Hi,
want
Margaret.
Hi. I just wanted to say that, you know, I think it's admirable that folks are trying to get the state to be more responsive, but they're making all the decisions. I mean, if you want to be a site, the city has nothing to do with it. You know, if you want to be a vaccination site, the city has, you can't approve you. It's got to go to the state. It is all controlled by the state. And it's really a problem. I mean, I happened to connect today
Yeah.
a group of folks from Bay Path College that has nurses and physician's assistants because they've been wanting to volunteer somewhere, right? With their, all of the students. And they kept calling the state and they kept, you know, we don't know. Because they had hooked up with the hospital out there. Now the hospitals aren't getting any vaccine. So they're going to do a mass site at the old Macy's store, right? So I connected her with actually my son, who's now contracted with the state to help them. But I mean, it's like the city people have no, I think you guys haven't had much say, right? I mean, really.
On the one hand, the state can be a barrier at moments, but that's when I think that we need to work in greater partnership on the city side.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes we don't have the best modes of communicating internally, and to really show up as a collective. And so there may be some of us individually calling, you know, the chief of staff for the governor to say, hey, I have an organization that is ready to go, has resources, the human capital to do mobile testing. And I need more sites in my district yesterday. And she usually is responsive to me. But if it's more coordinated on our side and pushing as a collective, which I think you're seeing more electeds do, there's tremendous power there. And of course, coupled with our people stepping up. And so why I really appreciated Carol's question, you know, while we are having some good response with respect to COVID, there's still a lot more to do, especially for some of our low-income communities, communities of color, LGBTQ communities, some of our elders in senior buildings who have yet to be vaccinated. And they are in our public housing. But if you have a wealthier building up the street, they've been all vaccinated. And so how do we, if we know that to be true, show up as a collective to push the state on some specifics? And I think there's a way to do that. And that's just us doing a better job communicating internally and then mobilizing our people as well to help.
It's got to get better.
That's right. No, that's exactly right. And we can't take our eye off it. And I will just say, you know, I'm out here campaigning, that's fine. But there are a lot of folks who are like, lady, I don't care about a campaign. I don't care about this race. I got people who are dying from COVID. I just lost my job, you know, or I'm dealing with substance use disorder or other things. And so I'm really trying to strike that balance of running a campaign, getting out there, but then also putting forth thoughtful policy that people can wrap their head around, which you'll see in the chat on these pressing issues of COVID, of our education system right now, remote learning, as well as mass and cast the opioid crisis, and some other pressing issues as well for some of our small businesses.
Yeah.
I know that we have questions from Harold and from Ben, and I'll take them together.
Okay.
Bundle them. Harold, if you want to ask your question. If I'm not hearing you, I'll let Ben ask his second question.
Thanks. This has to do with the role of the mayor and the role of city council. The last 10 years, city council has been incredibly representative and progressive, yet city council doesn't have very much power, particularly around budgeting. What do you see as mayor, as your role in negotiating with city council so that there can be bilateral influence of important budgetary issues?
No, it's a great question. And we recently as a council voted on some legislation that will soon, I think at some point, make it to the ballot, of course, around expanding the council's budgetary authority, and also looking more at participatory budgeting, which I'm all for. I frankly think it didn't go far enough. And maybe because I came up through the council, right? There's tremendous benefit of the council having greater authority. As council president, I engage with a lot of council presidents in other major cities. Chicago, I went to this incredible conference and they had council presidents from every major city in the country. And all of them looked at me after we all went around to introduce ourselves and talk about our role and our authority through a training. They couldn't believe how limited the council's authority was in the city of Boston. And I think if we are going to have greater transparency, but most importantly, accountability for the executive office, we need a stronger legislative branch of government. And I think that's true for some of our appointments. I think that's true for budget. It shouldn't solely lie with the mayor. There are some who push back on that, who think, the strong mayor is the way to go, especially coming out of a crisis. I disagree. I think you work in partnership with your council colleagues, you're more effective, and you have a greater impact on the issues for the constituents and for the residents. And that's what matters the most.
Okay. I think I'm unmuted now.
Okay, yes, Harold, you can ask the final question. This will be the last question before our next speaker.
Okay, just Andrea?
Yes, I'm looking for you. Hey,
Number-
I see you.
Now I'm looking at you, Andrea. I just want to thank you for such a
Nice
moving.
bookcase.
Yeah, I have to use some of those books one of these days. I just want to thank you, take a moment to thank you for such a moving presentation. In many ways, you tapped the nerve of what it means to be a democracy and where we're trying to go in terms of the type of equality that should define our community. I was truly moved. Now, specifically, many different issues, but I like to focus on one. We personally, as a family, have been privileged to have the impact of Boston Latin in our lives. But I'd like to know why Boston Latin is the exception instead of the standard, and what we can do to implement a serious, aggressive program to making every school have the outcome that Boston Latin is able to achieve. And I think that is, in many ways, the heart of a democracy, and it's not alien to what's possible. We lived in Germany for many years, and every school was a Boston Latin, or similar to a Boston Latin. And just what can we do to bring this democratic ideal to fruition? That's what Boston should be about.
No, you're exactly right. I often say, but for the grace of God and the education I got at Boston Public Schools, I wouldn't have made it to a Princeton University, and not with the tragedy, right, that I lived through as a child. And I wouldn't have been successful at a Princeton University. All 5 of the schools I attended within Boston Public Schools were deemed to be excellent. There are a couple now that are not doing as well. And that saddens me. So I think a couple of things. One is Latin school stands out. You're exactly right. But there's work to be done at Latin. I stay in touch with Mr. C, Mr. Conopassis, who I still call Mr. C, who was my headmaster, Miss Garrett, who is there now, on making sure that we continue to talk about how we allow for greater diversity at Latin school, et cetera. Those are pressing issues I think that many folks are talking about. And also, it's come up quite a bit, the resources that Latin school has, the human capital that Latin school has. When I was at Latin school, I could go into an office and get a job through the PIC office. Not all of our other schools, especially our high schools, have the same human capital, have the same number of guidance counselors. I had an assigned guidance counselor from 7th to 12th grade. That is not true for every student. Not every school, you can go into an office and get a job, or go into an office and get a mentor like that, right? And so I do think it's looking at all of the other high schools in the district and beginning to make sure that we are resourcing them, giving the teachers and the staff the human capital, the programming, everything they need to be successful. And I'll add, many of these high schools also have a different population they're serving. They have a larger concentration of English learners. They have a larger concentration of special needs students. They need more to be able to meet the needs of these students and these families, and they often do not have the more. They often have less. And so there are inequities in that. But I think there's a way in which to redesign all of our high schools, and there's been numerous reports done on this, a lot of different working groups, so that we're creating pathways for every student's dreams. Latin school is a classical education. That does not work for everyone. It may work for you, it works for me, it works for some, it doesn't work for everyone. Madison Park needs to be improved. We should have more than one Madison Park when you think about the number of jobs in the trades. You think about the jobs in the green economy, clean energy jobs. We should have numerous pathways to tech, all kinds of jobs that lead to these pathways. And every high school could have that. We have one Boston Arts Academy. We should have more than one. When you think about the cultural institutions right here in Boston that our children want to be a part of. And so I think there's a way to redesign all of our high schools so they have the resources that a Latin school has, and that they have everything they need to create pathways for our students to have true choice, and then to choose the choice in the high school that's best for them. And that's what I'm excited about. I can include some information in the chat around my education plans of the past and present, but this is near and dear to me, because if we don't get the education system right, and Boston Public Schools is the main ship, we need to get this right. Our students will continue to fail, and none of us want that.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Can we have a round of applause for our
Thank
speaker?
you. Oh, and Jonathan, I'll just say, I opened the chat and Karen had a question about substance use disorder. We can put our mass and cast plan in the chat, and Karen, feel free to follow up. So Jonathan, thank you so much for organizing. Stay safe.
Awesome, and thank you.
Thank you.
And then I'll bring up Dave Halbert, if you want to, let me find you so I can spotlight you.
Oh, hi, Dave Halbert. Sorry, he lives in my district. Bye, Dave.
Bye, Andrea.
Okay, let me spotlight you. Okay. Yeah, Halbert, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you so much to you all as committee members for being here this evening. It's wonderful to see so many, familiar and friendly faces, and even better to see ones that I didn't know from before. So it's great. It shows that this organization continues to be dynamic and to grow, and I'm excited about that. Once again, my name is David Halbert. I am running for one of the 4 at-large seats on the Boston City Council this year, and I'm running because Boston is an incredible city, a city that has given me so much, a city that is replete with opportunity, but also, unfortunately, not an equitable access to that opportunity for everyone. Boston's a city that purports and touts its diversity, but unfortunately, it is also riven with deep levels of segregation, sadly. I know that the challenges that are facing Boston are only going to be addressed adequately if we're honest about our reality, honest about our history, in order to create an honest pathway to where we want to go, and addressing so many of the pressing issues that have been discussed this evening and that we're going to continue to discuss over the course of this campaign and long beyond Election Day. I focus on a few in particular, but by no means exhaustive, especially around housing, economic development, and education, because those are some of the most salient and close to my heart. But when we're talking about housing, it is an issue that is driving so much of the conversation around what happens here in our city, whether we're talking about it in terms of development or housing access or housing justice, or the belief shared by so many, I'm sure, on this call this evening and by others across the city, myself included, that housing fundamentally should be and must be a human right. But the only way that we can do that is by having a comprehensive strategy around that, a strategy that looks both vertically and horizontally. Vertically at what we can do integrating with other communities and other entities, and understanding that the housing conversation is not a discrete Boston issue, and that the housing crisis is only going to be addressed with intentional work by a regional amalgamation and conversation that's taking place on a policy level. One that Boston should be leading as the largest community, as the one that bears the most burden and does the most work in providing housing access, but by no means can shoulder by itself. You can't have a community that has signs on people's front lawns talking about everyone being welcome there and what lives kind of matter, and then also fighting against having affordable housing, having multifamily units in those communities that are able to allow those individuals to leave and to show that they do matter. So we need to be having an intentional and informed conversation about that, and a candid conversation with our neighbors. But at the local level, on the things that we can control, we need to take and do more. We need to raise our inclusionary development policy number. It currently sits far too low. It needs to be raised to a minimum of 20% for on-site building and 25% for off-site building. And we also need to have an intentional conversation of what we mean and what the impacts are when we allow for off-site building and the wealth transfer between communities that happens. You know, it's not lost on me that when we have one community where just down the road from where we would normally be meeting, 87% or so of individuals are renters. And that means they don't have access to the equity that forms the basis for that staggering statistic that so many of us have heard time and time again of the wealth disparity between Black and white families in the city, $8 versus $247,500. And that sits a large part in the access to the equity in homes. So making sure that we're creating the kind of pathways that we need, not only for housing justice, but also for home ownership opportunities for those who seek to have that. You know, it's been something that is near and dear to me because of the fact that I'm the only reason that I'm able to be a homeowner is because of access to a creative public program. And I want to make sure that others have that similar opportunity. When we're talking about economic development, realizing that our small businesses in particular are so vital to our communities. Not only do they, create the flavor and the context and the texture of our neighborhoods, but they provide opportunities that people don't even think about. In my day job, I have the privilege of working in a program that seeks to bring college access education to individuals who are incarcerated and who are in reentry. And while we know that that access provides so many benefits, particularly around reducing recidivism rates, it only works if we have individuals who are able to find employment and employers that will support them in those educational pursuits. Those are our small businesses. Small businesses provide opportunities because they know these individuals coming back to our communities. They have gone to school with them. They have been in churches with them. They have coached them in Little League and so many other community activities. And they are willing to often to be the ones to take a flyer on them, to give them that second chance and allow them to become contributing parts of our communities. But we also have to understand that as we're thinking about our small business sector, particularly in the shadow of the pandemic, we understand that it's not a one size fits all thing. That what's going to be the prescription to bring our small businesses back and revive them, bring their vitality back in the South End is going to be different than it is down the road from where I am in Dorchester or in East Boston, where I formerly lived and still serve on the board for East Boston Main Streets. And so we have to take that viewpoint of allowing for the necessary resources for the kind of policy interventions that we need, but also the flexibility to make them culturally and geographically specific. And when we're talking about education, for me, it is a deeply, deeply personal issue because, of course, it is something that drives so much of the political conversation. But beyond that, I'm a BPS parent myself. So when I see conversations about education, when I think through what education policy looks at, whether we're talking about the school committee or the state of our buildings or expanding the conversation around our schools beyond our exam schools and to others and bringing the necessary and needed attention that they need, I think about them not just in terms of sterile policy, but I think about them in terms of my daughter, the experiences that she's having right now and the experiences that I want her and all of the students all across the city to have, the ability to have quality education regardless of where they go, regardless of where they live, and the opportunity to grow and thrive and succeed, and ultimately to be able to stay here in the city that they were born or raised in, and hopefully that they grow to love as much as we do. I think these are critical conversations that we have to have, but they are by no means exhaustive. We have issues relative to climate and environmental justice. We have issues relative to public safety and a host of others. And all of these are exacerbated by the impacts of the pandemic and what we're going to need to do to take intentional work to recover from the impact of the pandemic. And it's going to be work. But I think that the best way that we can do that is by having a city council and a legislative body that is as representative as it can be of the city to both minimize the blind spots that often we have because we don't share each other's experiences, but also to gain from the strength that happens when we bring different perspectives to the table for true representation. And I use that term intentionally because for me, representation is different than tokenism. Tokenism is just putting somebody in a place to say that you've checked off a box, have that kind of a person in a particular role. Representation is different. Representation is saying, can this person, this individual, do the job, do it well, do it exceedingly well, and then also bring a vision and a perspective that's unrepresented or underrepresented. As a Black man living in this city, looking at the city council as a body that has become more dynamic and more diverse over time, but now still sadly doesn't have someone who looks like me or the tens of thousands of other Black men across the city, I know that there are still those areas that we can step into and bring that vision. Once again, to expand our aperture for what we can do and how we can think about the policies and the policy solutions that are needed for this city. I'm excited to do that work. I'm excited because of my history of over 16 years working in the public sector and in and around public policy and public programs, but particularly because I was a former staff member serving on the staffs of Boston City Councilor Sam Yoon and John Tobin, and learning from them and experiencing and doing the work of a city councilor for years, and taking those calls, attending those meetings, listening to those voices, providing that constituent service, and understanding what it really is. And that at the end of the day, the lesson I learned from both of them is that you do your best work when you bring your authentic self to the table as a city councilor. But you have to marry that with a willingness and ability and an understanding that you have the privilege of not just working for those who are like you, who share your views, your vision, your neighborhood, your background and history, but all individuals within your constituency, whether that's a particular district or, in this case, the entire city of Boston. It is an honor, it is a privilege, it is hard work, and it is something that I am deeply looking forward to. I'm thankful so much for the ability to be here this evening with you and to have this conversation, and I look forward to answering your questions and hopefully working and earning your vote this fall.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And then we're now open for questions. So feel free, you can either ask your questions directly, put them in the chat, or raise your hand.
Or you can just tell me you're going to vote for me. That's fine too.
Okay. I can seed some of my own, but I can give the floor. Anybody want to ask anything before I go in with some question ideas of my own?
Carol has her hand up.
Okay. Carol, I note that I have this on speaker view, so if you have your hand up, I can't see you. So please raise your hand with the hand raise function. But thank you, Susie, for being a very, very on-brand teacher, spotting the hand raising. Carol.
Hi, David.
Carol.
How are you?
Doing well, and yourself?
Good, thank you. That was a great presentation. I'm always interested in people's day jobs. And after watching the Ken Burns documentary, College Behind Bars, is that kind of sort of what you do? I mean, this is not, city council race question, I know, but is that the kind of work that you do day in, day out?
Yeah, well, in fact, it is kind of a city council question, really, and thank you for it. I know that documentary well. It's very well known within our field. So the program that I work at is called the Educational Justice Institute. It's at MIT. It's about 4 years old. I have the privilege of serving as the outreach manager. So it's really about things like this, talking with others and letting them know about the work that we're doing. The work that we focus on, as I said, is really around expanding access to post-secondary education for individuals who are incarcerated and who are in reentry, and making sure that we're connecting that with workforce development and a number of other opportunities. It's kind of an entrepreneurial startup, if you will, within the larger MIT ecosystem. The reason I say that is something of a city council question is this. Here in Boston, we have, unfortunately, a disproportionately high percentage of individuals who have been connected to, in some way, shape, or form, the criminal justice system, particularly corrections. And so when we're having conversations around public safety, we're also having conversations around what we can do to make sure that our communities are whole. We have to have a conversation around corrections because it is a part of that continuum, and we want to make sure that we're providing the kind of supports that we have for individuals. And I'm glad to see that we have at City Hall now an Office of Returning Citizens and wanting to provide more support for that, but for those individuals to be able to come back to integrate into our communities and our society. The vast majority of people who are incarcerated nationwide, over 95%, will end up coming back to a community at one point or another. There's thankfully not as many individuals serving life sentences. A lot of times those individuals, unfortunately, when they go behind the wall, it's kind of an out of sight, out of mind thing. So it's very important for those of us here in society generally, and particularly for those of us who want to be or are in public policy making, positions, to think about those individuals and make sure that we're creating those pathways and those supports, because what we want them to do is come back into our society and contribute. What we want them to do is to be able to live and to thrive, start families, start businesses, do those things. But a lot of times, because of so many challenges they have, something that's just as simple as having an ID that people will recognize when you're trying to apply for a job, something that so many of us don't even think about, because you just pull out your license or pull out your passport and that's it. But when you're coming home from, being incarcerated, that is a real impediment. So having intentional thought about that and what kind of supports and support structures we can make for individuals who are coming from incarceration to bring them back into our communities makes them stronger, makes them better, and makes our community stronger as well.
Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions? I'll ask one of my own, the one that I was asking earlier as well. So when thinking of the kind of say like police accountability work and kind of public safety in the city, one of the best ways of reducing police brutality is reducing the number of times that police would be engaging with people on a day-to-day basis. And that there are many things currently housed under kind of police departments that police are often not the best equipped to serve. What would you advocate for kind of from a council perspective of what do you think of things that could be better housed in other agencies than the Boston Police Department in a way that would foster a more holistic sense of public safety?
Sure. No, thank you for the question, Jonathan. It's one that's well taken. I think when you view, when you're a hammer, you view everything like a nail, right? And that old adage holds for a reason. I think that when we're talking about public safety, as you said, a holistic view of what public safety truly is, public safety is not just an armed officer showing up and interacting at every single engagement. A lot of times it is making sure that we have access to mental health counseling when people are in crisis. It's making sure that we have access to treatment beds when people are dealing with substance abuse disorders. It's making sure that we have social workers who are able to guide families that are in need. I think that when we're talking about that, it's very important that not only we have the conversation on the policy of moving some of these roles and responsibilities, because we're not training down in Hyde Park at the Academy a group of licensed clinical social workers. We're not training mental health clinicians, things like that. We're training police officers so they can focus on things like getting our homicide clearance rate up, particularly in some of our more affected communities, reducing hopefully the number of incidents of gun violence in communities. It's not lost on me where I live here in Dorchester now. In 2019, the first murder of the year took place about 2 blocks from my house. All right, we want to make sure that when those serious crimes are happening, that they're getting the necessary resources to get the answers for communities to make communities feel safe. But it's not enough, once again, to just make the policy pronouncement. We have to put the resources behind it. And that's why I think it's so critical and so important that we're having intentional conversations around the budget, around where budgetary authority lies. To echo a little bit of what Councilor Campbell was saying, I am full agreement. As I said, I worked at the State House. I've worked around the federal government. There's just a fundamentally different way that most municipalities, most organizations budget than what we have here in Boston. It's a broken system. We need to give the city council, it's not just about power, but the responsibility to craft a responsible budget that puts our values, such as what we're talking about around public safety, into practice, and to work with the executive branch to put that out into the field for the betterment of everyone across the city of Boston. So I think, yes, we do have to have the decisions around what those policies are and where those resources are being directed, but also actually providing them with the resources. Otherwise, it's simply an unfunded mandate and a bit of virtue signaling.
Thank you. I see Susie has her hand up. And then Susie and then Lisa. I see Lisa in the chat.
Hi, Dave. Good to see you. I wanted to know, and it's you sort of started to talk about this, but so I work in the schools and I see so much disconnect, not just the fact that we don't have an elected school committee, but also just parents not being welcomed and involved as members of giving input in what's happening in the schools, and students as well. And I am wondering what you would do as an at-large city councilor to ensure more student and parent involvement in what goes on in the school. So for example, and I think you were aware of today that Kimani James was having a student retreat that was publicized, and I went to it and listened, and it was just so sad to hear this was the topic of mental health, but just hearing how students, a lot of them at exam schools, have had horrible circumstances as far as not even just since COVID, but before, based on decisions that are out of their control. And like, I know myself personally, a lot of parents who aren't welcomed into conversations at schools and have been at my previous school, in fact, discouraged from creating very strong political bonds for parents. to be involved. So what would you do as a city councilor to ensure that families and students have more say about what is happening in the school, or even a voice at all?
Well, thank you so much, Susie, and it's great to see you as well. Yeah, I think the first thing is our governance and oversight, right? The structure of the school committee, I don't think is working, and I don't believe that it's serving the city. I don't believe that it's serving students and families. And by the way, when I say that that is a structural conversation, because there are a lot of really good people on the city council, on the school committee, who I think have a heart for children, but they're just hamstrung by the way that it's organized, quite frankly. I've advocated for a long time for a hybrid school committee model. I think that's important. I think you need to give communities, families, and students agency and a voice, direct voice in their education and educational experience. I also think that you have to maintain responsibility and accountability directly for the mayor's office and add it to the city council in the conversation around education. And I think that you need to have the student representative have a vote. You know, when I was in college, I did my undergraduate at Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, public higher ed institution here in the Commonwealth. And I had the privilege of serving as the voting student member on the state's Board of Higher Education and allowing my voice as a representative of thousands of other students across the state to be there at the table and was taken seriously and was a part of that conversation. I think we need to have a voting student member for just that reason, and we need to empower them as well. So I think it begins there with governance. I think that's critically important. But I also think at the individual school level, we need to find those schools that are doing it right, because not every school is having the same experience. You know, I feel very fortunate in the school that my daughter's at that they're incredibly welcoming to parents and wanting to see parents be active and engaged and bring their voice and support what's happening, at the campus. And if that's happening there, there's no reason it shouldn't be happening at every school. And finding and identifying those best models, best practices, and seeing where we can replicate them and what's been successful and why. But we also have to be very understanding and intentional that the experience that some schools are having is directly related to the socioeconomic status of the majority of their student body, and that not all schools are created equal. There was an article that I always go back to years and years and years ago in the Globe where they were talking about two schools, the Madahunt and the Elliott, and talking about the experiences that the students and the communities had. And one school, parents were just as invested in their education for their kids and wanting to see the best, but they just didn't have quite frankly, the dollars to put into it, whether that meant putting into direct things that were happening at the school itself or in their agency and connection to the political apparatus here in the city. And so for one group, they were able to go and to speak to the mayor directly because they were at fundraising events for him, and for another group, they had to wait for their 2 minutes or 3 minutes at a school committee meeting and then be ushered on. We have to be honest about that, and what that means and how we have to do our level best to equate that. And that's what gets to the heart of educational equity. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to make sure that every parent and every student has the same level of commitment and engagement with their school.
Thank you.
Thank
Lisa.
you.
Oh, Lisa, I think you're on mute.
Hi, I have a related question. I'm thinking about how the way that schools are funded now is with the weighted student formula, so that if a school has lower enrollment, it doesn't get as much money as other schools. And I was wondering how you felt about having a foundation budget be added over the weighted student formula, and also with school fundraising, would you be open to the idea of schools sharing funds in some way so that schools that have like a lot would share with schools that just aren't able to fundraise as much? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That's a great question. I think to the question of student funding in particular, yes, the weighted student funding formula has not served all of our kids well. I think there needs to be a significant conversation about what our new model is, whether it is a foundation, whether it's something completely new. We need to have everybody at the table, educators, parents, of course, policymakers, and the individuals who are the bean counters at City Hall to make sure that we're making sure the dollars and cents lay out. But I am definitely open to that conversation. I think it's an important conversation for us to have for a host of reasons. To your second point, I'm a kind of a wonky guy, so I love that kind of a question. I've actually advocated for some time that what we need to have is a way in which funding can be shared to an extent. And what I mean by that is you should be allowed to raise, and we can figure out what that cap level is at any individual campus. And as schools and as school communities can raise those funds, allow them to pour in. And when you hit that cap, I think it should be split. Half of that money remaining on your campus because you are doing the work to raise it, of course, but half of that going into a general fund that can be tapped by other schools, as you said, that may be, less resource for various reasons, particularly around socioeconomics here in the city. But I also think that one additional element to that that's really important is that as part of that central fund, that a significant portion of that money is spent on capacity building work to help those lower resource schools and provide the parents, to provide the staff and the faculty there with strategies. And we have a wealth of knowledge and information around this, particularly around fundraising here in the city of Boston, to provide them with the strategies to allow them to do better and more effective fundraising within their communities. Why do I say that? Two reasons. The first is, of course, we just want them to be able to, if they need to raise more money for some of those extracurriculars. And we also need to have a parallel conversation about the school department budget and making it so that we're reducing the need for individual schools to have to raise money to have things like art and gym and other things, right? But the second is a matter of agency and pride. Nobody's asking for a handout. No school that I've talked to, no parent that I've talked to is looking for that. But a lot of times there are just technical and structural impediments to doing that. So I think if we could provide that kind of support and that kind of training, it's something that they'll be able to utilize both on the campus and hopefully in other aspects of their lives, and giving them more voice, giving them more agency, giving them a better feel for having a handle and a role within their school community. It's empowering people. And that's what it's really all about, not just giving people things, that whole, give a man a fish versus teach a man to fish model.
I can take one more quick question if anybody has one before we then wrap up. Going once for possible questions. I'm sure people will have many throughout the cycle. But hearing that, I want to thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And can we have a round of applause for our speaker?
Well, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, all of you, for taking the time this evening and for allowing me a few moments here. Annika Jensen, who's my new campaign manager, only here on her second day, so I'm so happy that she's able to be here with me. Probably put some information about the campaign here in the chat. Love for you all to stay connected. Please follow us on social media, shoot an email, check out our website, and most importantly, as you have feedback, as you have ideas, as you have questions, please send them my way. I by no means have the answer to every question, but I am always open, as Jonathan will tell you, for a conversation about policy really at any time of the day. But I thank you once again just for allowing me this opportunity, and look forward to the chance to earn your vote between now and November.
Awesome. Thank you so much.